Part 1 Whispers in the villa. The camera glides silently through a Roman villa. It is evening. Shadows from the setting sun stretch across marble floors, while faint lamps flicker inside, filling the air with a golden haze. The viewer does not enter as a tourist, but as a trespasser, an unseen guest slipping between walls that once guarded secrets. The Roman villa was not merely a home. It was a stage, a fortress, a prison of appearance. Within these walls, the most powerful society of the ancient world played out its most private dramas. Here, ambition and affection, desire and discipline, beauty and cruelty all coexisted in fragile balance. The atmosphere of luxury step into the atrium, the central chamber of a noble household. A pool of water reflects painted walls, frescoes of gods and lovers entwined in eternal embraces. Perfumes linger in the air, imported oils of myrrh and cinnamon, worn not only to seduce but to display wealth. Wealth was fragrance, and fragrance was status. Every surface is decorated. Ivory combs rest on bronze tables. Silver mirrors reflect faces powdered with white lead, lips tinted with crushed cinnabar. Beauty in Rome was both dazzling and dangerous, an artifice that concealed poison. But behind the gleam of elegance lay another layer, whispers cautious and deliberate. Every glance, every word exchanged in these rooms carried weight. For intimacy in Rome was never simply private. It was entangled with politics, family honor, and survival. The whispering voices imagine, for a moment, the low voices of women seated together, their hair wound in intricate braids, slaves weaving strands for hours. They laugh softly, but their jokes carry an edge. Who is pregnant? Who is unfaithful? Who is gaining influence in the household? In another chamber, men recline with cups of Falern and wine, discussing alliances disguised as dinner chatter. Their mistresses, slaves, or companions slip between them like shadows, present but not acknowledged in the conversation. The villa was a theater of whispers. Some whispers were flirtations, others conspiracies. All of them had consequences. The tension of appearances. To live in Rome was to live under scrutiny. A husband's reputation was measured not only by his speeches in the forum, but by the conduct of his wife in the villa. A wife's fidelity was not simply personal, it was political, a reflection of her family's honor. Even the most intimate acts became public matters. A senator whose wife was rumored to be unfaithful could lose allies. A woman accused of impropriety could see her entire household humiliated. Privacy, in the Roman sense, did not exist as we know it. What happened in the bedroom might echo in the Senate. The sensory world. Close your eyes and hear it. The scrape of a slave's bronze strigil on oiled skin after a bath. The faint hiss of a lamp wick dipped in olive oil. The murmurs of poetry being recited in the triclinium, verses by Catullus or Ovid that blurred the line between love and obscenity. Feel the textures, rough wool togas against perfumed skin, smooth marble under bare feet, the sting of depilation wax as a slave pulls hair from the flesh of their master. Pain, pleasure, and luxury intertwined so deeply that Romans scarcely distinguished them. The villa as a time capsule. Many of these villas were lost to time, buried beneath earth, fire, and silence. Yet in places like Pompeii and Herculaneum, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD froze them in place. There, walls still whisper, not with voices, but with images, frescoes of lovers, graffiti of crude jokes. Bedrooms where the bed frames still bear impressions of linen. Through them, we glimpse not the grandeur of emperors, but the fragile details of ordinary Roman desires. The paradox of Roman intimacy. Rome's approach to intimacy was built on contradiction. They glorified chastity yet celebrated excess. They demanded modesty in public yet indulged in spectacle at festivals. They condemned adultery yet romanticized affairs in their literature. In every villa, these contradictions came alive. A wife carefully guarded her modesty under the watchful eyes of her family, while her husband was permitted freedoms she could never claim. Slaves endured exploitation, their bodies extensions of their master's authority. Yet within these confines, real affection sometimes blossomed, forbidden, fleeting, but undeniably human. Foreshadowing the journey as we leave this villa behind, we are left with a sense of unease. The frescoes smile, the perfumes linger, the laughter of banquets echoes faintly, but beneath them lies a truth more complex. Roman intimacy was never just about love or lust. It was about power, power over the body, power over reputation, power over life itself. The villa teaches us a lesson. In Rome, even the most private whispers could shape destinies. And so our journey begins, not in the roaring crowds of the Colosseum, not in the marble halls of the Senate, but in the quiet chambers where Rome revealed its truest self. Part 2 The Ashes of Pompeii. It begins with silence. The silence of a summer morning in 79 AD, when the bustling streets of Pompeii stirred to life as they always had, merchants setting out amphorae of wine, bakers pulling loaves from ovens, slaves fetching water from the fountains. The city was alive, unaware that this day would be its last. Then, in the distance, a low rumble. Birds rise from the Bay of Naples. Children glance nervously at the mountain that has always loomed above them, green and unthreatening, Mount Vesuvius. By nightfall, that mountain would turn into a roaring monster, and the whispers of Pompeii would be buried beneath ash for nearly 2,000 years. The frozen world, when Vesuvius erupted, it did more than destroy a city. It preserved one. The falling ash and volcanic debris sealed Pompeii in a terrible cocoon, trapping houses, streets, and bodies as if time itself had been arrested. For historians, this catastrophe became a gift. Nowhere else in the Roman world do we see everyday life with such clarity. Rome's grand monuments survive, the Colosseum, the aqueducts, the Senate House. But Pompeii shows us something far rarer. The bedrooms, the taverns, the kitchens, the private spaces where Romans truly lived, loved, and lusted. Inside the houses, step through the doorway of the House of the Vedia. The frescoes are still vivid, despite centuries underground. They do not show battles or emperors but scenes of erotic play, lovers entwine, gods in mischievous embrace, a world where the divine and the human blurred in desire. These images were not hidden away in shame. They were displayed openly, a part of household decoration. For the Romans, sexuality was not confined to the shadows. It was woven into their art, their jokes, their sense of beauty. Elsewhere, in smaller houses, graffiti still scrawls across the walls. Crude sketches, love notes. Boasts of conquests, some real, some imagined. A man declares his love for a woman named Iris. Another writes of a night spent with a prostitute. They wrote because they believed the walls themselves were listening, keeping their secrets safe. Ironically, the eruption ensured those whispers would be heard by us, centuries later. The brothels of Pompeii. Among the most startling discoveries is the Lupanar, Pompeii's largest brothel. Its walls are lined with frescoes, each depicting different sexual acts, not merely for decoration, but as a kind of menu for clients. The rooms are small, barely large enough for a stone bed. Yet in these cramped spaces, Roman society revealed its hierarchies in their starkest form. The wealthy and powerful came to indulge. The enslaved and powerless worked here, their bodies commodified. It is easy to romanticize Roman passion, to think only of feasts and lovers' poetry. But the brothels remind us of another truth, that intimacy in Rome was deeply tied to inequality, often brutal, sometimes transactional, always unbalanced. The bathhouses. Beyond the brothel, the bathhouses of Pompeii offered a different kind of intimacy. Step into the stab-in baths. Steam curls around mosaics of dolphins and tritons. Men recline, rubbing perfumed oils into their skin before slaves scraped them away with strigils. Here, gossip flowed as freely as water. Deals were struck. Flirtations sparked in corners. The bathhouse was a social equalizer in theory. Senators and commoners could share the same pools. But in reality, the same hierarchies persisted. Certain hours were reserved for women, certain rooms for the wealthy. Even in relaxation, Roman society never truly undressed. The last moments archaeologists uncovered plaster casts of bodies, forever frozen in their final gestures. A man shielding his face, a woman clutching a child, a dog chained to a wall, writhing in vain. Among them, more private moments, lovers lying side by side, caught in an eternal embrace. Were they spouses, prostitutes, or strangers seeking comfort as the ash fell? We will never know. But in their silence, they speak of something profoundly human, the search for intimacy, even at the edge of annihilation. The contrast of grandeur and fragility. Pompeii was not Rome's most powerful city. It was provincial, modest compared to the capital. And yet, in its ruins, we see the essence of Roman life more clearly than in Rome itself. Here, there are no marble senators debating in the forum. Instead, we find taverns where drunks scrawled jokes on the walls. No emperors giving speeches, but bakers selling bread stamped with their seals. No generals returning in triumph, but lovers whispering in small, painted bedrooms. It is in these details, the graffiti, the frescoes, the frozen bodies, that we glimpse Rome's true heart. Pompeii is a mirror. What makes Pompeii unsettling is not how different it is from us, but how familiar. A man doodling obscene graffiti is not so different from our anonymous internet scribblers. A woman painting her face with dangerous cosmetics is not far from modern obsessions with beauty. A couple sneaking away for an illicit affair, is that not timeless? The ashes of Pompeii are not merely an archaeological site. They are a mirror, showing us that Rome's people were not abstractions from dusty history books. They were men and women with the same desires, vanities, and vulnerabilities as ourselves. The legacy of the ashes. As the camera pulls back, the city lies quiet beneath its blanket of gray. Streets empty, roofs collapsed, frescoes fading in the dim light of torches held by modern archaeologists. Yet within this silence, voices still whisper, the laughter of bathhouses, the sighs of lovers, the cries of slaves, the songs of children. Pompeii was destroyed in a single day, but in that destruction, it achieved a strange immortality. The ashes preserved not only walls and objects, but emotions. The things Romans never intended to last, their jokes, their passions, their flaws, are the very things that survive. And so, from these ruins, we carry forward the lesson that history is not built only on emperors and armies. Sometimes, it lives in the private moments of ordinary people. Pompeii reminds us, when the ashes settle, it is not power that endures, it is humanity. Part 3. Pudicitia and power. The Romans had a word that shaped their society, their laws, and their most intimate relationships. Pudicitia. At first glance, it means modesty, chastity, or virtue. But in Rome, pudicitia was far more than private morality. It was a public currency, a quality that determined honor, reputation, and political survival. It was a weapon, wielded by men to control women, but also a shield that women could wield in turn. To understand Roman intimacy, we must first understand this idea, where sexuality was never just a matter of the heart, but a theater of power. The goddess Pudicitia. Romans worshipped Pudicitia as a goddess. She had temples in the city, where matrons offered prayers, asking to be seen as faithful wives and guardians of the household. Her image was often depicted with a veil, her eyes cast downward, a symbol of self-restraint. But this restraint was never about personal freedom. It was about a woman embodying the honor of her family, her husband, her lineage. Her body was not her own. It was a mirror of male virtue. Women as symbols. A Roman man's reputation could rise or fall on the behavior of the women in his household. A wife's chastity, a daughter's obedience, a sister's modesty, all reflected on the male head of the family, the paterfamilias. A chaste wife was praised not simply for herself, but because she elevated her husband's status. An unfaithful wife did not merely dishonor herself, she brought shame to her entire lineage. And yet, these women were not powerless. Their reputation gave them influence. A matron celebrated for her pudicitia could wield enormous moral authority, sometimes even surpassing that of senators and generals. The case of Lucretia. No story reveals this better than the tale of Lucretia. According to legend, she was a noblewoman during the time of Rome's kings. Admired for her beauty and chastity, she became the target of Sextus Tarquinius, the king's son. He assaulted her, and in the aftermath, Lucretia summoned her family. She demanded vengeance, and then took her own life to preserve her honor. Her death ignited outrage. Roman nobles rose against the monarchy, driving out the Tarquins and founding the Republic. Thus, a woman's pudicitia toppled kings and gave birth to Rome's most enduring political order. Even centuries later, her story was retold as the ultimate example of chastity as power and as sacrifice. Livia Drusilla, virtue and intrigue. If Lucretia was myth, Livia Drusilla was flesh and blood. Wife of Augustus, the first emperor, she became Rome's model matron. She dressed simply, spun her own wool, and cultivated an image of modesty. Poets praised her pudicitia as the foundation of Augustus' household. But behind this image lay political brilliance. Livia maneuvered carefully within the role of the virtuous wife, guiding succession, strengthening her family's grip on power. She showed that pudicitia could be both a mask and a weapon, outwardly modest, inwardly ambitious. Her example reveals the paradox at the heart of Roman intimacy. Women were expected to embody chastity, yet within that role, some found ways to exercise immense influence. Marriage as politics. In Rome, pudicitia was tied closely to marriage. A wedding was not simply a union of love, it was a contract of alliances. A woman's chastity was essential to ensure legitimate heirs, and legitimate heirs secured political power. On the wedding night, symbols reinforced this expectation. The bride wore a flame-colored veil, a sign of her purity. Her hair was parted with a spear, a gesture linking fertility to Rome's martial destiny. And she entered her new home by being lifted over the threshold, to avoid stumbling, an omen of future dishonor. Every gesture reinforced the idea. Her virtue would define not only her marriage, but her family's fate. Law and punishment. The power of pudicitia was enforced by law. Under Augustus, adultery was made a public crime. Husbands were required to divorce unfaithful wives. Fathers could even kill a daughter caught in adultery if discovered in their home. But these laws were not applied equally. Men could sleep with slaves, concubines, or